The Lake District has always been a dangerous place, being home to some of England's most deadly animals such as sheep and badgers. But in Atomfall, this region of the UK has somehow become even more fearsome. And so, I've come up with 20 tips to keep you alive and ensure that you can eventually escape the quarantine zone. First tip is to use stealth. While Atomfall is not technically a stealth game, it basically is a stealth game if you don't want to end up dead. By keeping down low and avoiding the attention of enemies, you can often avoid fights entirely, or pick off individuals with deadly takedowns. This is especially important early on when your equipment is going to be both limited and terrible. Stealth is one tactic you can always try and use, but it's certainly not the only one. As you progress, unlocking new skills and weapons, you may find that certain playstyles work better for you. I personally have found that I can land headshots from quite a distance, so I try and start fights at long range in order to take down enemies without them being able to land a shot back. You, on the other hand, may have found melee to be your strong suit, and so you try and get up close and personal in as many battles as you can. Either way, this is an example of forcing an advantage, which is something you always want to do. Often it's less about what your preferred playstyle is, and more about the types of enemies you're dealing with. If there's just a single ranged enemy trying to take you down, you should get up close and personal. If foes you face are melee based, keep your distance by walking backwards while shooting. And if there's too many to face all at once, maybe attempt a bit of stealth to pick them up individually, or even just avoid the fight altogether. Most fights are entirely optional, and if you can't find a way to have the upper hand, then you probably shouldn't be engaging the enemy. Third tip is to do with magazines and skills. At the very start of the game, you will have a severely limited number of skills unlocked. In order to get access to any more of these, you need to find skill manuals. Each of these you find can be read in order to unlock 3 new skills, some of which are particularly powerful. These manuals are all over the place, and there tend to be multiple for each one. You can often find them in merchants' inventories, as quest rewards, or just laying around in unexplored locations. Keep your eyes peeled for these, as they're one of the most valuable types of loot in the game. The one I'd be most on the lookout for is the crafting manual, which unlocks the gunsmith skill, allowing you to upgrade firearms. I'll get on to how that all works in a second, but first I figure I should give you some hints about where to find this particular magazine. If you've managed to make your way to the interchange, then it is possible to find it here, though it is tucked away in the storage room of Data Store Delta, meaning you'll need to power up that area and search around for the keycard in order to get inside. Alternately, you can get your hands on it in the much more accessible Wyndham Village. The local shopkeep, Morris Wick, seems to be in possession of this item. You may be able to trade with him to get it, though vendor inventories tend to switch up a bit, so I'm not certain how reliable it is. But there's also a couple of other ways to get it. Either by killing him, though you definitely want to save your game before doing this one, or by playing through the Church Mystery questline and bargaining with Morris when the opportunity presents itself, which should get you this valuable item for free. Now that you know how to get your hands on this perk, I'll explain why it's so valuable. Firearms in Atomfall have 3 different tiers of quality: Rusty, Stock, and Pristine. Rusty weapons are most of what you'll find, especially early on. These guns have been worn down and poorly looked after, making them less effective than they should be. This could be a reduction in damage, range, or some other stat. Stock weapons are the level at which the weapons should be performing, and these can still be found in the world, though typically in the hands of dangerous enemies or in heavily fortified areas. Pristine weapons, on the other hand, cannot be found just by wandering about and looking in every nook and cranny. These are the top tier, granting bonuses to damage, range, stability, control, you name it. A pristine firearm will be the best version of that gun that it's possible to be, but the only way to get one is to craft it with the gunsmith perk. In order to upgrade your guns, you need to go into the crafting menu and select the appropriate weapon. Every recipe takes a little gun oil and scrap, but also requires you to have 2 weapons of a lower tier. To make a stock version of a weapon, you'll need to sacrifice 2 rusty versions, and to make a pristine version of a weapon, you need 2 stock variants first. Essentially, with 4 rusty weapons, the gunsmith perk, and a decent bit of oil and scrap, you can make a top quality weapon that'll see you through to the end of the game. That's enough nitty gritty for a bit. Next tip is to stay on Protocol's side. Protocol is basically just the new name for the army. They're the ones in control of Wyndham Village, and they have a presence in every major region of the game. These guys are typically kitted out with strong firearms, a little bit of armour, and sometimes giant killer robots. And if you make an enemy of them, they'll send all of that at you and more. Fortunately, you start the game neutral to them, and by helping out the captain in the village, you can get on their good side, allowing you to remove them as a threat without having to fight any of them. You may eventually want to go against them later on, but I wouldn't recommend getting on my bad side until you're strong enough to take on all the dangers they represent. Fortunately, Atomfall is a game which lets you help out an individual or faction and then turn on them right after. If you want to get the maximum reward for every lead you follow, then the best way is to typically help one side out, then help the other side out, and then loot from both of their dead bodies. Many of the game's quests give you a choice of who to side with, but not every instance makes you an enemy of the other side, so it's best to use this to your advantage. I'll give a vague example here, as I'm not wanting to spoil any of the story. There's a lead you find at the church which is particularly intriguing. I ended up finding out all the information about it, blackmailing one individual for the reward, telling on them to another person anyway for another reward, going back to the blackmailee to kill them for an additional reward, and then turning in the person who told me to do a murder of them for yet another reward. Rather than being a half-decent person with a working moral compass and only one reward, I ended up as a duplicitous and untrustworthy monster who had more loot than they could carry. Quick tip now, don't play football. Seriously, it's not worth it. There may be a pitch set up down in Skevamore Prison, but that doesn't mean you have an open invitation to it. Sure, it's fun to kick the ball through the goal and do a little victory dance, but the guards will not be happy with you. Next tip, use all of your equipment. Earlier I talked about how you can upgrade guns, and doing so makes you much stronger. You may think from that tip that it means you can then rely on your firearms entirely, but that is not the case. First off, there's the fact that you have limited ammunition. Every fight you face will drain away at your ammo, and you typically won't get anywhere near as many bullets back as you spend if all you use are guns. If you try to play this game purely as a shooter, then you will run out of ammo. Instead, you want to try and keep at least one melee weapon on you, and some powerful throwables. Grenades and Molotovs are perfect for dealing with closely clustered groups, allowing you to kill multiple enemies with a single attack. Melee weapons not only serve as a good way to ration your bullets, but are also good for staggering enemies. I once ran through the dangerous prison level, punching every guard I saw repeatedly until they died, and it took me ages to take any damage at all. If you are in a one-on-one with a non-melee enemy, then the best thing you can do is keep hitting them until they don't get back up. It's not just weapons you have at your disposal though, you also have tools. Namely, the torch, the metal detector, and the signal redirector. The torch and metal detector are ones you'll likely find very early on, and shouldn't have much trouble locating. Just wander around, loot dead bodies that you find, and you'll be golden. The torch is not only good for a bit of extra visibility, but can also make lootable items shimmer, helping you to find things faster. The metal detector will beep when near buried treasure, and I personally really enjoy searching for these hidden caches. The signal redirector, on the other hand, is a little more complicated and much harder to get your hands on. The only location that seems to house this difficult device is Skevamore, often referred to as the most dangerous region. There's a couple of potential locations here to find one, though both are protocol facilities. The better your relationship with this faction, the less potential fighting you will face, though you still shouldn't expect things to be easy. One signal redirector is located deep within the prison, while the other is locked away in the protocol field station. By talking with NPCs in the region, you should be able to gather hints on how exactly to get them. Once you do have this rare item, you can use it to switch power around, turning off turrets and alarms, and even opening some new locations. I even heard a rumour that the very starting area of the game has some extra places to explore if you head back with this item. Remember how I started this video with a joke about sheep being dangerous? Ha ha ha, what a good joke I made there. Except it wasn't a joke at all. The sheep will kill you. The wildlife you encounter is not something to be underestimated. While exploding sheep are rare and easy to avoid, there are many swarms of animals who will try and tear you apart. These can mostly be swatted out with your weapons or stamped out on the ground, but both these methods will still typically result in you taking some damage. In general, it's best to avoid the wildlife where you can, and when you do have to deal with them, make sure to use my next tip. Don't be slow. Combat in Atomfall can sometimes feel rather sluggish, and with the heart rate meter, it's not like you can just sprint around the place non-stop like in many other video games. But I'm here to tell you now that these features are here to trick you into thinking that the game is slower than it is. Yes, weapon swapping is slow, but that just means you need to make sure your weapon is out and ready before you need to start shooting. Likewise, if you're planning on lobbing a Molotov at a giant robot, don't waste time rummaging through your backpack to equip it and then take forever to line up the perfect throw. Instead, you want it already in hand, lit, and ready to lob. The main way for you to be fast in this game is to be prepared for the situation you're about to face. Have what you need hotkeyed, check your guns are reloaded, and then, and only then, do you push ahead. Being prepared for every eventuality is all well and good, but with such limited inventory space that's easier said than done. You have space in your backpack for 4 large items and 12 small ones, which turns out to not be that much storage. If you carry a weapon for every ammo type, then you're already using up all large spaces and one of the small ones too. Throw in a small melee weapon, a few healing items and other consumable buffs, and a couple of explosives, and suddenly you'll find yourself with no room left for looting. At some point, you're gonna have to make sacrifices on what you carry and what you leave behind. In general, I'd always recommend having at least 3 different reusable weapons, either melee or firearms, 1 or 2 throwables to deal with groups, and at least 1 strong healing item, such as a first aid kit. That will then leave you with half your carry capacity for whatever you find on your travels, but obviously this will still be filled fairly fast. Fortunately for us, we have access to the pneumatic dispatch tubes. These can be found in several interior locations, typically at the start of bunkers or other similar feeling areas. This is essentially your stash box, a place to store away any items you want for later without having to just throw them away. So whenever you start getting a little weighed down, head to one of these and unload all your excess equipment. Easy as that. Tip 14. Stop storing everything in the pneumatic dispatch tubes. Why are you storing everything here? Because some bozo on the internet told you to? Have you seen the kind of nonsense people say online? You should not be listening to what anyone says there. The PDT only has 100 storage capacity, which I know sounds like a lot, but trust me, it will fill faster than you think. Once you start putting away every healing item and throwable for later, you quickly realise that you don't have a room for the things you actually need to store. And trust me, trying to deal with both a full backpack and a full tube at the same time is not something you want to have to do. Instead, use the pneumatic system sparingly. Only put a handful of consumables and throwables in there at most. If you keep storing them for later, then it's clear you're not actually using them. What you actually want to keep in the tube system are any atomic batteries you find but can't immediately plug in anywhere, and firearms which you'll be upgrading later with Gunsmith. Keep in mind that only firearms can be upgraded, and once they reach pristine, you'll never need another copy again. Once you've fully upgraded your hunting shotgun, it makes no sense to keep 5 other shotguns stored in the tube. Get them out of there and leave the space for something else. If you're sparing with how often you're storing things away and not being a full-on loot gremlin, then you can avoid many painful inventory management sessions. And on the subject of hoarding, don't hoard your skill points endlessly. Look, I get it. You have to unlock different skills, and it's tempting to save up the limited points you have until you know what all your options are. It's especially tempting given that the game doesn't have an XP system, instead rewarding skill points through training stimulants, which you loot while exploring. But you will come across more of them, and you can afford to spend your points now if there's something you want to unlock. Honestly, this tip is more for myself than it is for anyone else. I'm currently only missing 2 skill books and then I'll have everything available, and yet I'm carrying around 22 unspent points. Sure, some of the skills cost half a dozen points or so, but I am definitely saving up too many points. As a rule of thumb, 9 is the maximum. If you're saving double digits number of skill points for later, then you need to start spending them. You'll get more points as you explore anyway. You can spend them now, it will only help you out. It's even more important to spend those points, considering how some can help you tackle one of the worst dangers the game has to offer: environmental damage. As you travel, you'll sometimes come across clouds of different coloured gases. Walking through these for an extended period of time is basically lethal. If there's just a small cloud you're facing, then you can stumble through and just lose a chunk of your health. But if a room is filled with green, yellow or blue gas, then maybe don't run in blindly with no plan for what to do. Chances are there's a way to ventilate the room, or you're supposed to come back later. On to bartering now, one of the more unique mechanics of Atomfall. There's no currency within this game, so in order to buy the items you want, you'll need to trade what you have with the various vendors you run across. Items have different values to different vendors, so you'll want to look out for arrows which indicate if that NPC values the item more or less than normal. Corporal Bootsy, for example, is a military man, and has no real need of grenades, so you don't want to trade those with him. However, one of the first traders you're likely to meet, Molly, is apparently a bit of a pyromaniac, and values Molotovs more than most. Figuring out which items each vendor values most can help you to get their best items faster. Of course, there is another way to get the most important items, which is to just kill them. Look, I'm not saying that you should do this. In fact, I'm saying you shouldn't do this, because then you'll lose out on any future stock and ammo they might be able to sell you later. But if you do want to see the kind of items dead merchants drop, then maybe check out the Kill Everything run I'm doing on my second channel. I've only just got started, but I've already found that it's a much cheaper way to get your hands on keys and atomic batteries. We're getting close to the end now, so you're probably striding through the quarantine zone with a bit more purpose. But I want to stress that you should still be careful. There are traps everywhere, and if you don't watch where you step, then it could get you killed. Purchasing the Disarm Trap skill will allow you to deal with tripwires and often get you the odd extra throwable, but not every ground level trap can be dealt with in this way. If you find yourself in the minefield, then make sure to stay on the right path, as wandering off could be lethal. Penultimate point, learn from your deaths. Look, even with all the help I've tried to give in this video, you're still probably gonna die. That's just the way it is. What's important is to learn from these deaths. Don't just reload, head in with the same approach, and then be surprised when the same thing happens again. Instead, you want to figure out why you died. Did you push in too aggressively? Did you hang back when your targets had rifles? Did you mess up stealth in some way? By working out what went wrong, you can account for it the second time around and then get a successful encounter instead. And last of all, there is no shame in turning down the difficulty. Atomfall is a tricky game, and which parts are considered difficult will depend on who is playing. Personally, I am terrible at stealth, so anytime I try to remain undetected, it feels like a real challenge. But I'm pretty good at landing headshots, so a gunfight is much more my speed, and I can play on the higher combat difficulties for that reason. Some folks will enjoy that the game doesn't really point you where to go with quests, while others will just find themselves lost. Remember that you're playing this game to have fun, and that means you should modify the difficulty settings to what feels best for you. There are so many settings to go through that allow you to really customise things, so you can play the game any way you want to. If bartering is annoying, then make that easier. If you're facing too many enemies at once, then turn down enemy population. If you want things to feel more immersive, then you can turn up the exploration settings, removing the compass and waypoint markers. There's so much to customise in the settings, so make use of these features and modify the game to make it the way you want to play. And that's going to be it for my tips. Please do leave a like if you found this helpful, and leave your own advice in the comments below. If you want some more tips, then my buddy Katogenesis made a similar video to this one. I'll leave a link to his in the description. And if you'd like to see regular Atomfall content from me, then go subscribe to my second channel, Bad Company Gaming, where I'm currently doing my Kill Everything run of the game, with new episodes out every Monday and Friday. As always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.